The shoreline was quiet when they found it. Cabins stood with their roofs torn open by something that was not wind. Fish racks still hung with bones. Tools lay where they were dropped, not laid down, dropped. A cooking pot sat on a fire ring cold for weeks, but still rimmed with soot. Boot prints trailed toward the trees and then simply ended like someone stepped off the earth. There were no bodies, no boats pulled away, no messages carved or left behind. Food was half prepared, laundry still strung on lines. The only movement was a door rocking in the wind, tapping against a frame it should have been latched to. The village was empty, not deserted, vacated. Whatever happened did not take time, and whatever they walked into, something had walked back out. This was Portlock, a remote cannery settlement on the southern edge of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. It existed only for a few decades in the early 20th century, long enough to appear on maps, long enough to send out lumber and fish, and long enough to be abandoned so completely that its disappearance became folklore. At its peak, about 40 men, women, and children lived here. The place was isolated, supply-dependent, and surrounded by dense timber and tall mountains that pressed the sky down close. According to the record, the village effectively vanished in a single season. There was no declared evacuation, no documented relocation, and no mass grave. Locals said something in the woods hunted people, a presence they never described with confidence, but spoke of in lowered voices. This is the story of a place that fed a frontier economy for years, then emptied faster than anyone could explain, leaving cabins, tools, and silence. The settlement sat at the edge of a narrow inlet where the tide pulled hard and the fog settled low. Behind it, the forest climbed fast, steep ridges, dark timber, muskeg that swallowed boots, and valleys where the wind never reached. Rain was constant. Summer lasted 6 weeks if it was generous. The beach was stone and kelp, not sand. Everything smelled like salt, spruce pitch, and diesel. The village itself was simple. A cluster of wooden cabins, a storehouse, a cannery on pilings, and a single trail that disappeared into the interior like a promise no one kept. People worked fish and timber. Men cut logs, women cleaned salmon. Children helped until they were big enough to do something that counted as work. There was no sheriff, no pastor, and no one stayed unless they were too stubborn or too broke to leave. Travel was slow. Reaching the nearest harbor took a day by boat in decent weather, longer when storms closed the channel. At night the mountains caught sound. Strangely, voices echoed from slopes where nobody stood. Occasionally hunters reported hearing something moving above the tree line. Too heavy for a person and too quiet to be a bear. People lived here because the work existed, and because work was all some of them had. The land did not welcome them, but it fed them, until it did not. The first incident could be explained away. A logger was found on the beach, torn badly, the kind of injuries a bear could make, but in a place bears rarely wandered. Men gave themselves the explanation they needed. He slipped, he fell, something dragged him after. The wilderness did not argue. A week later, another worker failed to return from the timberline. Searches found his axe, one boot, and nothing else. The village chalked it up to the wilderness. Then came the footprints. They were wide, roughly human in shape, too deep for a single man to have stamped, and they led into terrain where the trail simply disappeared, as if the weight behind them had gone upward instead of forward. Men started working in pairs, then in groups of 3. They carried rifles, but not to hunt. Stories began to circulate of something pacing the ridges above the camp. A shape, a figure, always uphill, never close enough to see clearly. Tools began disappearing at night. A fishing skiff slipped its anchor and vanished, then reappeared days later, half sunk on a distant shore. People whispered that they had heard something moving in the trees, something that did not crash branches or huff like a bear, but walked like a man. The cannery foreman tried to keep order. He sent men farther inland to scout new timber stands. 2 of them came back early and refused to return. They said they had heard something keeping pace with them in the tree line, holding perfect distance, as if tracking them without ever closing in. Summer storms rolled in. The small cemetery behind the cabins washed out, coffins exposed and scattered. The men rebuilt the fence, but it did not hold. The new posts were found knocked out flat before sunrise. By fall, fishermen were sleeping with rifles within arm's reach. Families kept lamps burning through the night. In the foreman's notes, one phrase began to repeat around camp: "There's something up there." No one described it plainly. No one agreed on its shape. They agreed on only one thing: it was watching them. And the more they spoke about it, the closer it seemed to come. The last hunt was supposed to be routine. 3 men went inland to scout timber above the creek. Only 2 came back. They did not retrieve the 3rd. They did not organize a search. They arrived in camp pale, refused to say what had happened, and started packing their belongings before dawn. Within 24 hours, half the village followed their lead. Boats were overloaded and left in bad weather. Some men did not wait for the tide. They dragged skiffs over rock, tore hulls, left gear where it lay. No meeting was held. No formal vote was taken. People simply left, one after another, as if staying had become more dangerous than facing the open sea in bad conditions. There was no official evacuation, because there was no official decision, only departure, sudden and infectious. The settlement crossed the point where a community can come back. It never did. By the following spring, the inlet was quiet. Cabins began to sag under constant rain, cannery machinery seized with rust. Dock pilings leaned under tides that no longer brought boats. Supply ships arrived months later to find no one on the beach to meet them. A delivery crew walking the site reported tools still lying where men had worked, sawdust still visible beneath beams already beginning to rot, and a trail of prints on the ridge that ended halfway up a slope as if the walker had just dissolved into thin air. No relocation ledger was filed, no official destination is recorded for the families that left. Some later stories claim those names resurfaced in other fishing camps, but nothing in the record cleanly ties the population of this inlet to any new town. What remained here was taken by the weather. Roofs collapsed, the cemetery fence washed out again, the cannery buckled sideways under snow load, hunters and timber crews began avoiding the inlet. Those who had to pass by reported the feeling of being watched long before the shoreline came into view. Once in a while, a passing party found a cabin door hanging open even though the floor inside was choked with debris and moss. There were no fresh footprints on the threshold. Attempts to resettle the site failed. Crews withdrew after weeks or months, citing equipment loss, animal harassment, and what they called bad ground. The land absorbed the buildings, but not the story. Among locals, the name became a warning, not a memory. Today, the place still sits on maps, but not on itineraries. Pilings rot in shallow water, cabins have collapsed into moss and ferns. Rust bleeds through the remains of the machinery. From offshore, the shoreline looks like it was never lived in at all. Local elders still refuse to camp here. Some will not speak the name directly. They call it that place, or where people left. Hikers who push inland report faint movement in the timber above the creek. A scatter of small stones, a shift of branches, and then nothing. No one has found graves. No mass relocation records exist. No written account from those who departed has surfaced. The settlement remains as it was left, unfinished, untallied, unclaimed. Portlock emptied, and it never reopened.